This is my friend and father, Kesis Melaku Terefe. He's the Ethiopian Orthodox priest in Los Angeles. And he and I met at the Princeton collection back in somewhere around 2006 or 7, something like that. And then as things have developed, we have found ourselves producing metadata for thousands of manuscripts, and I mean something like 8,000 manuscripts we've worked on together. I have learned an amazing amount from this man, and Kesis Melaku represents a kind of person that we don't have in the West. Someone raised in the tradition and has a wealth of knowledge and understanding of the tradition and of the literature, not just the literature, but the living environment in which this literature comes to life. Too few people like Melaku are being utilized in this process of trying to get more manuscript images and then create metadata that are useful. Kesis Melaku, tell us a bit about your growing up. What was your experiences with manuscripts as you were growing up?
Thank you, Professor. When it comes about about manuscripts, it's especially for my family, it's a love story. I was born and raised in clergy families. My father, Marigita Terefe, he is an expert scholar in church poetry, Kane, and Yared music, Degwa. So he has this deep connection, deep love for manuscript, because he's also before he came to southern part of Ethiopia, he is from northern part of Ethiopia. So he teach students. So he used these manuscripts. In addition to his church education, he was also a well-trained scribe. So he told me that he had written a lot of manuscripts when he was in northern part of Ethiopia. And in our cities, the parchments are very scarce, and also there is no scribal tradition around there, so it's very difficult to get it. But when he has spare time, you can see him, he's writing on something. I want to show you some, because of poor handling, most of his manuscripts on paper disappear. But when I go there, I get some of them. I don't know if you see, these are his writings. With he wrote in a grade paper, and these are Bahir Hassab computers. He wrote on this, so it's a beautiful hand, very good writer, and also you can see from. He wrote on this exercise books. These are from around 1943 Ethiopian calendar. So it means around 60 years ago, something like that. So he tried to keep up, with his scribal practice, and he was doing that on paper. But he tried to pass those skills to us, to his children, but we failed on that respect. But I saw, I was born in that environment, and I'm familiar with that. And also, he trying to tell me the importance of that tradition, because when I visited him for the last time before he died, he gave me his Psalter, as a gift. And he told me, to give this Psalter to my son, to pass this Psalter to my son. So I raised on that environment at home. And also, of course, as a church also, these manuscripts we use them in daily basis. So that's my relationship with these manuscripts.
Yeah, so you grew up in an environment that not only had manuscripts around, but appreciated, and so you had kind of a love instilled in you through the practice of the community you were in. But you have become a person who has a vast knowledge of the breadth of the tradition. Folks, there are times when we'll be cataloging manuscripts together, looking at images connected in the Zoom room, and we'll be looking at turn the page, and he'll not just tell me what the thing is, he'll start singing the text in its liturgical setting. And the breadth of your knowledge and exposure to the tradition. How did you learn these things as a young person growing up to acquire the knowledge you did of your tradition?
As you know, most of these manuscripts are church service books. For example, psalters, homilies, hagiographies, and synaxarium, so on. So for me, there are books, using for daily church services. So I'm familiar with them. I know the content of these manuscripts in most cases. Sometimes there are historical, rare manuscripts, historical books, or very rare homilies. So besides that, most of them are, as a deacon and as a priest, I'm using these manuscripts. But also, I think I am privileged to access these manuscripts, working with you and other scholars. I get a lot of knowledge, from the work we do, and through that cataloging experience, I understand more about manuscripts, scribal practices, and traditions. So most of the knowledge came from my experience at the church. So that's the most useful experience in my case.
As you and I began working together, and we began to get 200 manuscripts, 400, 1,000 manuscripts under our belt, what were the most challenging parts of trying to understand the way that Westerners look at the manuscripts from your tradition?
Well, in most cases, I think there is no problem. But sometimes, you mentioned that sometimes some scholars trying to understand the text without the community, without the community which produce those manuscripts. So yes, I gain a lot of knowledge from the academic world, because the discipline, the patterns, the uniformity, and other methodology, those are valuable skills. But sometimes when we are rigid on those methodologies, and if we are shut off from other experiences, other views, sometimes it becomes challenging. So I can see sometimes very strange conclusion from what I am experiencing from as an Orthodox Christian, or as priest, or as a deacon, or as Ethiopian who raised on that culture. So that's a little bit challenging. Other than that, to be honest, there are a lot of knowledge from this experience you can get, so I am a privilege to get that kind of knowledge.
You are one of two people in my life who I've been privileged to work with who had traditional training and vast knowledge. His Grace Ewostatos Gebrekristos, bishop in Minnesota, lived near Portland for a while, and he and I spent a couple of years working together on a few hundred manuscripts. And how many people are there like you out there, and how do we develop healthy and mutual relationships with one another? We could talk for a long time about the challenges in understanding one another's cultures and one another's categories, even around the objects of manuscripts. You'd think it'd be straightforward, but there were these, it takes time together and deep relationship building before we can produce work that is going to have some value to it. Are there others, and how would we go about developing good relationships?
I think every priest or deacon from Ethiopian or Eritrean Orthodox Church, they have potential, to help on this adventure, on this research, because they are familiar with the content, and they are familiar with manuscripts. Yes, most in recent years, published books are dominant books in our church, but they are not stranger for manuscripts. But I think we have to develop this, as you said, mutual respect. We have to develop this scholarly dialogue. Sometimes, from Western scholars, they use them as, there is a term, resource person. Yes, that's good idea. But
or informant,
just to get information, if that's the case, then it's very sad, because there is more than information. There is experience. There is living community here. We can illustrate. If you want to study Qumran manuscripts, you have to study the Qumran communities. But the big difference is the Qumran community ceased to exist, but the Ethiopian and Eritrean Orthodox churches alive. So that respect has to be kept, And also there is another, from our side, from Ethiopia and Eritrea side, there is a negative attitude we have to reject. Unless you are Ethiopian or Eritrean, you can't understand these manuscripts. So that's also not true. There are so many brilliant scholars, we are grateful for them, like Dillman, Ludolf, Roger Cowley, so many people, from the past I quote. So we have to have this dialogue. If we don't have Abba Abraham, we don't have Ludolf. If Roger Cowley went to Gondar, he immersed on that culture, and he produced amazing scholars books, amazing scholars. So this deep respect to the tradition, deep respect to the community, and also deep respect for scholars. I can say, for example, from Ethiopian side, for example, Alaka Kidano Oldikfle, in his dictionary, he worshipped literally Dillman. He said, his angelic mind, he said so many things about Dillman. This deep respect for scholars from Western world, and also scholars from, when Roger Cowley saying about Gondar scholars or Gojam scholars or Tigray scholars, he has this deep respect. He has this deep appreciation. So we have to keep this dialogue, and we can produce a lot of things. I want to go back to the second question, because I learned from my experience. Yes, of course, these manuscripts are important for theological and literary discussions and discoveries, but also these manuscripts are archives of Ethiopian history, archives of Eritrean history, and we can learn a lot, even for solution for our current sad experience, for our current political and socio-economic crisis. You can see the unity, the interaction of people, communities, appreciation, So, you and me, when we are cataloging, and when we saw those tourist paintings on first folios, we were, disappointed, because we know on those first 2 or 3 folios, there are so many stories, untold stories about the people of Ethiopia, about the people of Eritrea. So we have a lot of things to do, and please pray for Ethiopia, for Eritrea. And thank you. I can see a lot of scholars. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your dedication. And it's a lot for the people at home.
Kesis, Melaku, again, I so appreciate our relationship and the contributions you've made. There are several catalogs that Kesis Melaku has authored. We've worked together on with other scholars, and the kind of relationship of learning and mutual respect and appreciation, I think, is the sort of thing we've got to do. And there are all kinds of reasons why we will end up not working together, Westerners and Ethiopians, in this task. But if in the next generation we have to do things on a big scale, we have to maybe consider these possibilities. And there's a whole set of discussions about quantity and quality. And sometimes it's true that the best is the enemy of the adequate. And we can't face that, and it's to our detriment. And on the other side of the scale, there's so many things. But I just like to say, during these days, at this moment in time, one of our possibilities is to turn to one another and develop relationships of mutuality and respect and mutual learning. And we will produce things that won't be perfect, but our work will be passed on to others, and they can benefit from it, hopefully. Thank you again, Kesis Melaku.
Thank you.
I should have mentioned this at the very beginning of our presentation. I received an email from Director Yukuno Amlak, the director of National Archives and Library Agency of Ethiopia, saying that the Ministry of Culture, his boss, had requested him to take a trip with him today, and that has made it impossible for him to be present with us today. We're going to move into the next part of our agenda here, which has to do with what I'll call just simply digitizing things is not yet to realize the full potential of the informational age, and certainly not to engage yet in computational quantitative analysis of the tradition. There are a number of things that have to happen between here and there. Ashlee Benson has been working with me for 10 years probably, transcribing manuscripts, and more recently working what we call the EMIT metadata project. We have a goal to take all of the images that we've digitized and all of the metadata that Kesis Melaku and others and Jeremy and I have created, and put all of that into the Beta Metzahoff system at the University of Hamburg. If you don't know about that system, almost everything we're talking about here today, that system represents the Grand Renaissance Dam. It represents the structure anyway, without the water behind it. It's the framework that will support the next generation of Ethiopian and Eritrean manuscript studies. The work that it takes to get things from a set of digitized images, you got to. Now I have. Well over 1.5 million images. How in the world do you find anything, and where do you put them, and how do you access them? One step. So our goal is to move all of these things and put them into the Beta Metzahoff system and have them then available for everyone to be able to access. This requires a set of operations that is actually mind-boggling and complex. You've got a bunch of images, but when you're putting a set of images into the Beta Metzahoff system, you may not discover until you're into it that there's a missed shot between folio 57 and 58 or something. And that can really mess with the alignment of metadata and images. And so Ashlee Benson has a 16-minute presentation in which she walks through all the different considerations when it comes to cleaning up sets of images of manuscripts. And she's very experienced by now with well over 2,000 manuscripts that she's worked through all the image sets to verify. And so in excruciating detail, illuminating detail, she walks through the kinds of things that go wrong and how then we fix them. All of that in preparation for depositing them into the Beta Metzahoff system.
So when we have an image set, the first step in analyzing the image set is to go to the raw files that we have. And there are two ways that we actually analyze an image set. The first way is when an image set has a book that, as you can see here, has been paginated. So it actually makes it much easier and quicker to go through the image set to certify it. You can see both types of numbers are on this particular book, which is very nice. But what we would do is normally we would just check to make sure that every single number does in fact exist in the order that we expect it. So this is 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7. So we would just do that throughout the entire book, which makes it very, very quick and very easy. Another way that is usually, honestly, more common that we analyze an image set is by analyzing the quire structure of the image set. So this book actually has, we're in the midway of the book. This is a pretty good example. There's two things I'd like to point out here. The first of which, if you look at the gutter here, there's a decent amount of space in between each quire. So this is the end of one quire. This is the beginning of another quire. You'll see when I flip to the next image that the gutter, when in the middle of the quire, there's not usually a gap like this or a space. Another indicator that this is the beginning of a quire is the presence of this quire number. It's not always the case that a book will have quire numbers on each quire, but when it does, it makes it very easy. So the way that we go about analyzing these image sets is we count the sheets on either side of the quire with the strings being in the middle. So I'm going to do that really quick. So this is sheet 1 right here. Flip that sheet 2, flip this, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then there's strings. So there's 6 sheets on this first half of the choir. So we would expect, if it's a balanced choir, there to be 6 on the second half as well. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we do see, as you'll know, kind of the gap in the gutter, and there is another choir number starting right there. So this choir did in fact have 6 sheets on the front half and 6 sheets on the back half. So it is considered balanced. So what we do is we go through the entire book and look at every single choir and make sure that every single choir is in fact balanced. Now, obviously, that is not always the case. There are some instances that kind of cause us to take a pause in some things. The first of which is the presence of something called a stub. So I'm going to pull up the stub that exists in this image set. Excuse me. There we go. Okay, so this is the beginning of a choir. I know there's no choir number, but it is because we can tell from what has come before. So as you can see, this line that runs down the page is actually something called a stub. And when I flip back and forth between these two images, you'll notice that the stub is on the left-hand side in this image, and then goes to the right-hand side in this image. Now, we actually take only one of these images for the final image set that we put on the website. We don't remove the image altogether. We move it towards the end of the image set so that sometimes there's an instance where the stub is pretty substantial in size and will actually cover up some of the text. So we choose the one that is the best and reveals the most of the text, but we put the other one at the end of the image set just in case there is a word or even a letter that somebody wants to see. But when we are counting, like we were doing before, we actually have to make sure and count this stub as a sheet. So we have an example of that in this choir right here. So this one actually does have, I misspoke earlier, a choir number at the beginning of the choir. So I would count 1, 2, 3. So I would expect 3 sheets on the latter half of the choir. So I would count 1. And because this is a stub, that's actually considered 2 right here. And then when we go over one more, 3. So we don't count the secondary shot of the stub because it would have already been removed. So that's how we handle stubs. Then the next way that we come across something very common is when, and during the digitization of these manuscripts, there are images that have been shot more than once. Usually it's pretty obvious, but sometimes, as you'll see in this scenario, this shot and this shot are actually the same image, but for some reason, something happened during the digitization, and the amount of light that was let into the lens is provided a very different picture. But if you zoom in, you can see that the text is identical. So we would actually treat this duplicate shot the same way that we would when there are 2 shots of the stub that we just talked about. We would just put it at the end of the image set. And then another pretty common phenomena that happens is when there is something called a missed shot, which is when we expect there to be a shot that isn't there. So like we did before, there's two ways that we assess the choir, which is one through pagination or by actually assessing the choir itself. So this first example that I have is of a choir. So I'm going to pull up the first folio of the choir. You see the choir number right there. So we're going to count again, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we would expect 5 sheets in the latter half as well. Let's count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is where we would expect the choir to end, but it's not. So 6. So what that means is that in the first half of the choir, there was actually a missing shot somewhere. So we're going to go back to the first half of the choir. And there's two ways that we analyze where the missing shot could be. Oftentimes there are some kind of hole or marking or something like stitched into the parchment that makes it clear that there is something missing. Other times we're not as lucky, and so we actually have to analyze what the text says at the bottom of one in comparison to the top of the other, and if it actually makes sense. In this case, it was pretty easy to figure out what the missed shot was, because if you look on this very first page, there's actually a hole right here in the bottom right. If I flip the page over, that hole is missing. So what we would do is we would go into the image set and we insert a blank image that says missing shot. As you can see, this is the hole. And so the next page will look like this when it finally is put on the website. So that's how we address missing shots when we can tell if there's something missing from analyzing the choir structure. There's also a way to address missed shots when the pagination is off. So in this image, we analyze the number. Obviously, this looks like it's number, zoom in, 269. So we expect the next to be 270. And as you can see, 272. So that means that the shot that would have had 270 and 271 on it was not taken during the digitization. So we would do the same thing that we did with the last one, where we would put a blank screen with a black image and just write missing shot on it. So that's kind of how we clean up the image sets. That's a very big priority before we start coding the manuscripts and the metadata into the system so that it can be put on the website. But we also have a priority of making the image sets actually user-friendly for the individuals who are accessing the website, and making sure that they're able to utilize it for whatever project that they're working on. So sometimes things happen that make a very great manuscript not ideal for some reason. First of which is, especially in the instances where these manuscripts are paginated, you have some issues with human error of the actual numbering. So there's 3 different things that can happen. On this one, you'll see this is number 184. So we would expect 185 to be over here. It is not 185. It actually goes down to 149. And then if I go over, that's 150, 151, 152. And then look what happens just 2 pages over. That's 185. So sometimes numbers get skipped, they get reversed. It can go a little wonky. There's also other instances where the pagination will stop altogether, usually because there is a space between books, or there's something else, as in this example will show. So this is the number 15. So we would expect this to be 16, 17. As you can see, there is no pagination. 18, 19, no pagination. 20, 21, that is not 21, that is 16. So they actually stopped the numbering on this image set to accommodate for these pages. And this has happened multiple times in this specific manuscript. So we actually have to make notes for when we go in and code the manuscripts so that the image set links that are on the website are, when clicked, take you to the proper page, because the lack of pagination actually makes things a little bit more tricky. The last example I have of numbering issue is in this manuscript. As you can see, that's number, I believe, 136. Flip this page, also 136, and then 137. So the entire rest of the manuscript maintains that error. So that is something that we have to make notes on so that the image links are correct and we can change those. There's also some other things that are interesting that we've come across. This particular manuscript, the publisher realized after the fact that they had missed some text. And so they had inserted this page right here. As you can see, it has a number 183 on it. The back is blank, and this is also 183. So the text is different, but again, it's considered a pagination variation. So we want to capture that so that the users are able to actually figure out what is going on. There's a couple other examples in these manuscripts where there are folios that just are not expected. The first example is of just loose folios that can be found in the manuscript. So you'll see right here, this is a loose folio. Or another even more interesting example is in this manuscript. There's actually an entire booklet right here that has been added. It's pretty substantial in size. So basically, if we have anything that we've coded the location for that comes after this book, the location link would be incorrect unless we didn't accommodate for this in some way. So we have to notate things like that. And then the final example I'd like to show today is just again, for the sake of being a user-friendly website and doing our absolute best to show that anything that a user may think is wrong with the image set, that they shouldn't worry. So this is the first image set of this manuscript. And if you'll see, you can see that there's actually a folio before this first image. Now, if a user were to go on the website and see that, they might be concerned that there's a file or two that's missing from the image set. But what we do is we capture this information and we actually code it so that the user can see on the website that there is not, in fact, anything that was shot prior to this image, so that they don't need to be concerned that it's the rest of the image set is going to have an error in it or something like that in some way, shape, or form. So our goals here are to make sure that we have a certified image set that makes sense throughout the entire thing. And if it doesn't, then we have some kind of notation so that the user understands exactly what is going on and can utilize the website for their purposes effectively.